Continue to discuss the big stories of the day. Rob Double back with us, creator of Meet the MPs, cracking new podcast. How are you getting on, Rob, since we last spoke in meeting the MPs?
Very good. A lot of them are on holiday at the moment.
Yeah, they love a holiday over there.
Yeah, so no, filming starts in the next couple of weeks and then first one's out in September. So, yeah, going well. Looking forward to it.
Let's look at the first story then. We've been talking about Channel crossings. I mean, more than 700 people crossing the Channel yesterday, the highest since Labour came to power. That means the total this year is 18,000. I always say this, Rob, it doesn't matter whether you're left-wing or right-wing. That is surely a number that everybody, particularly the Home Secretary, should be concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, and particularly in the context of the general election, how big an issue was the issue of borders and illegal immigration and small boats in that election campaign? If you remember Keir Starmer against Rishi Sunak, the then Prime Minister, in that debate, having a real sort of tussle over what is Keir Starmer going to do. If he doesn't like the Rwanda policy, if he doesn't like the way the Conservatives have approached it, what is Labour's solution? And the response of we're going to smash the gangs and we're going to set up a more coordinated interdepartmental team to fix the issue. That was all surface level words, but I think now they've really got to show that they've got a robust answer to that question now they're in government.
It's interesting. That was Rishi Sunak's sort of one moment, I think, wasn't it, in that particular, I think it was the ITV debate where he kind of had Starmer on the ropes a little bit and he put in a fairly smart response of, you know, whether he was going to meet with the head of ISIS to discuss what the deal is. And so for a moment, and there weren't many, if any others, Sunak, you know, shone for a second on that particular bit of policy. But of course, now we've got a new government in power. This comes under their watch. And the curious thing is, I'm hearing Yvette Cooper talk about a lot of things, Rob. I'm not, other than, you know, the smashing the gang thing, but not the actual situation itself. And you'd think, well, surely if, I keep making this, you know, OK, it's fairly well worn now, comparison, that if 700 people jumped over the barriers at Heathrow, we did talking about nothing. There'd be helicopters in the sky, Sky News, BBC, everybody would be front page story. The Home Secretary doesn't even talk about it.
Yeah, and I think this is a real challenge for Labour, and I think this is part of the transition for them of being in opposition for so long and being able to just, you know, be able to criticise policy from the government side and not really be given the full scrutiny over what they would be doing if they were in power. Now they are in power. They actually have to give the answers. They have to provide the solutions. And then they're going to be held to task on it like none of them really have been that used to. Yvette Cooper has been around for quite a long time, but there's a lot of inexperience in the Labour government now over actually being in power and making the threads of government and departments work. And, you know, this is going to be something that they're really going to be held to task for in the context of the reform, the absolute burst of the Reform Party at the last election. You know, the sentiment of the issue of the boats being so clear on the doorstep for so many MPs when they were out canvassing for votes in their local constituencies. This is something they need to get aware, you know, be really on top of. And it's quite interesting. Obviously, they've had the riots. They've only just got into power, really. But this is something I'd expect to see them be very proactive at in the coming couple of months, at least.
You'd have thought so. You'd have thought so. Well, it comes as Dame Margaret Hodge, who has to be referred to now as a Labour grandee. It's what happens when you get to a certain age and no longer do the job as a MP. She stepped down at this last one. She says the Labour Party have always been too scared to talk about immigration and must show leadership on the issue, warned, saying that party ignores the underlying anger of some voters at its own peril.
Absolutely that. So for context, Dame Margaret Hodge is a Labour grandee in that she's been in the party a long time, and she's also fought the BNP when they had a particularly big rise in her Barking constituency back in 2006. So in terms of dealing with issues which are very contentious and which can be taken by the far right and used as something to stoke up resentment or stoke up issues and use as a vehicle to get you know, to stir up tension. She knows what she's talking about. She's battled with these kind of ideas and battled with individuals who perhaps want to push the narrative towards the far right. She's got a lot to say, and the Labour Party need to probably listen to her, because she is saying we need to be leaders now. And again, this goes back to the point about being in government and not in opposition. It might have been convenient from a pure election strategy to be quiet on certain issues that they knew were divisive or politically quite difficult for them and their voter base. But now they have to really bring them to the forefront and actually tackle them. Interestingly, Margaret Hodge says, her solution is the Labour Party must champion multiculturalism. It has been silent
Rob, your line has just, at that very point, always at the pivotal point, has just got the better of us. We'll try and get Rob Double back with us in a couple of moments. A couple of other stories to talk about. It's interesting when Margaret Hodge talks about Starmer needs to a new strategy to promote multiculturalism. Now, multiculturalism, depending on how you read it, is something that, and I don't even, this is not about colour, this is about culture, right? Multiculturalism. Can you have, I always refer to the Panorama documentary on Blackburn, and each time I say this, I have to say, I think it was Blackburn, which used to be Jack Straw's constituency, and has a long-held Labour seat, and Panorama years ago went over there to Blackburn and made a documentary on a sort of divided town, really. So you had Muslims on one side, non-Muslims on the other side. Now, nobody was having a massive row. It wasn't that there was a riot. There was just no integration between the two. And in the last, I'm tempted to say, 7 or 8 years, they went back to Blackburn to see if it had changed, and it hadn't changed at all. It was a complete place divided. Now, there might be some people who say, do you know what, that's fine. I'm all right with that. I don't care if it's divided. If that group function on their own and they're peaceful and that group function on their own and they're peaceful, does it really matter? But as Rob there was saying, she's not trying to say that everything is perfect, but she's right that I think in the Labour Party, and we've got Rob back with us, I wonder, Rob, whether discussing immigration just isn't in the Labour DNA. And when I think about people around the cabinet table or people who have ministerial posts, I'm thinking Jess Phillips, who I know a little bit, and Angela Rayner and people such as this, I just can't imagine those characters getting very animated about the issue of immigration. I can't imagine they know or they believe there's anything to tackle, frankly.
Possibly, yeah. I think this is going to be the real challenge for them, because there is a clear growth, particularly with the Reform Party growth. The low voter turnout as well in the last election showed a clear frustration with the political answers that were being offered by any of the parties, but let's say the Labour Party as the party of government now. They need to behave like government, and they need to bring solutions to the table and have these discussions which are uncomfortable for them. There is no ability when you're in government to say, these is politically uncomfortable, I'm quite uncomfortable talking about these issues, therefore I'm just going to quietly ignore them. That's not going to work for them in government, and they've got a grace period. They've got a little bit of time to work it out. The electorate do give a little bit of time for new governments to get their feet under the table, but they're going to have to come up with solutions pretty soon. Starmer, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, has been very effective in the criminal phase of the issue with the riots. Clamping down on the law and order part, and obviously with his background as a prosecutor, that is a very that makes sense. But now he has to go to the next stage, which is we now have to show that we can control our borders, we can engage in conversations and frustrations around immigration, and then we can stop issues like immigration becoming targets for manipulation by groups that perhaps don't have the UK's best interest at heart, and obviously those people who take to the streets and commit criminality.
Yeah, and he's got to acknowledge that, hasn't he? And, if he doesn't start talking about that, he might. There could be a rather more cynical interpretation of this, and that is that if you fast forward 4 or 5 years, what is likely to happen is the Conservative Party, but based on where we're at now, the Conservative Party would become split even more. More will go over to Reform. It won't be enough for them to have any long-lasting impact, and the Conservatives will remain in opposition once again, and Labour will be, with a slimmer majority perhaps, will be the government again. And maybe they're making that calculation, as far away as it might seem.
Possibly, but I think you've also got to remember that the Conservative Party, as the party of opposition, is largely absent at the moment. First off, because the electorate don't want to hear from them for a little bit because, you know, they've had their time in government. They need to go away and find an identity now. But secondly, they're just going through this leadership contest, which is going to be a very much internal gazing process. So there isn't an effective opposition really for the Labour Party to have their feet held to the fire. The moment a new leader comes in full of energy and full of focus, the Labour Party are going to find there's going to be a lot more narrative and a lot more news coming their way, which is going to be putting them under scrutiny over what they've done in the last 3-4 months.
Indeed. Well, with that in mind, Angela Rayner in the news again. She's abandoned plans to give Brits council housing priority. There's a bit more to the story than the headline there. Labour's Housing Secretary quietly dropped a Tory proposal to introduce a UK connection test in social housing applicants. Her department confirmed it would not go ahead with the reform, which would have meant that only those living in Britain for at least 10 years could get on the 1.3 million strong waiting list. And again, that's going to feed into the it's not in their DNA argument to talk about this. People like Lee Anderson, you might have heard of him, Rob, has criticised Angela Rayner and said why hard-working families in this country should be at the bottom of the list, I don't know. But a Ministry of Housing spokesman said the vast majority of councils have already adopted local connection tests and 90% of social homes go to UK nationals. That's where it's at so far.
Absolutely. And I think this is, again, an example of the Labour Party needing to mature essentially a little bit in how it talks about issues and realising that they can't just bury things that are uncomfortable when you're in government. People notice, people care about these issues, particularly a flash issue like housing, where so many people have very strong frustrations and quite right frustrations around the quality of housing being available and also the amount of housing being available and the lists that people have to go on to just simply have a roof over their head. You know, if they're going to make this decision that they're going to scrap this policy, it might have been that actually in practical form it wasn't needed. Local councils do a lot of this already and there actually isn't that much of a problem here. But then say that. You need to tell the electorate what you're doing and you need to explain it to them, particularly if you know that if you create an information void, people are going to fill it with superstition, and some people are going to fill it with rumours or things that aren't even true. And so this is a good example for the government getting it a bit wrong in communication, particularly on issues that it knows it's vulnerable to. And it's no surprise that Lee Anderson of the Reform Party was extremely quick to get on this, point this out, and hold the government to account over it. It was obviously going to happen. And I really question Angela Rayner and the Labour team's decision to try and do this quietly in the first place. It was never really going to work.
And it was never going to stay quiet, something like this. Final one, fears of work from home culture will grow in Whitehall under Labour. Of course, it's often the civil service that are pointed out as the one area of UK life that spends most of its time in a hammock rather than at a desk. I'm sure there's some mischief in all of that, but there are the government is refusing to lay out a policy on how often it expects civil servants to work in the office. I think the last government told officials they should spend 60% of time at work. I mean, to many people, even that, Rob, it's like, you've got to spend 60% of time at work? Really? How terrible for you. Labour has so far refused to lay out a policy on this one, but there is a sense that they could be more generous than the previous government.
Exactly. I mean, I think that all we've got at the moment from the government is they haven't fully committed to what their thinking is regarding flexible working, regarding working from home. And I suppose this fundamentally, what do I really care about here when it comes to the civil service? What I really care about is that they're offering value for money and that they're offering a quality of service to me whenever I need them and I need them to be functioning. So, I personally don't see how working 3 days a week in an office is a particularly hard ask, but I understand that there are many, many thousands of people in the civil service have for whatever reason, need to maybe have more flexibility. As long as they can do their job and they're delivering a quality service, should we really care? I'm not sure whether this is that much of an issue, but fundamentally, I think work from home as a permanent thing, it can work in startups, it can work in tech businesses when it's built from the ground up to be very much an enabled infrastructure around that. For a civil service of hundreds of thousands of people involved of all different types doing different things, I do question whether the idea of civil servants being able to permanently work from home or not have physical contact with each other, not sit in rooms and discuss things face to face. I do question the value of that and whether that's going to give the UK electorate the quality of service that really it deserves.
Indeed.
But, you know, I'm open to, I'm less angry about it this one, Ian, than perhaps some people, because I do see it can work. I'm just slightly not convinced about whether for the civil service it's the right one.
Got it. Listen, Rob, thank you, as ever. Rob Double.